All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the key findings from our survey on a national strategy for U.S. international education. My name is Elle Butler, and I'm head of marketing for North America. I'm coming to you live today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I know we have folks joining us from across the U.S. as well as north of the border. So some of our Canadian friends are joining us today, so welcome to all. We are thrilled to be presenting the results of our recent U.S. sector survey, which was a massive sector-wide initiative supported by all of the organizations that you see on screen here right now. So thank you to everyone who was involved in making this survey possible. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be shared with you in a follow-up email. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tool located at the bottom of your webinar window, and we'll cover those questions at the end of the session. So jumping ahead to our next slide, I've already introduced myself, but I'm very pleased to be joined today by Jessica Sandberg, Dean of International Enrollment Management at Duke Kunshan University. Jessica is a trusted consultant to IDP, and a few years ago, Jessica and I worked very closely together on the You Are Welcome Here campaign. So we have a long history of working together in international education, and I'm thrilled to be presenting with her today. And just before we dive into the survey background and results, I will do a quick overview of IDP for those of you who may not know us. So IDP is the global leader in international student placement, and we are a proud co-owner of the IELTS test. We have a physical presence across more than 30 countries, and our websites attract over 100 million visits a year. We specialize in combining human expertise with digital technology to help students get accepted into their ideal program and help institutions to enroll the best fit students. We partner with more than 890 higher education institutions around the world, and our data and insights are relied upon by organizations across the globe to help ensure that policies are informed by the diverse needs, challenges, and motivations of students. And this survey that we're sharing today was made possible thanks to our incredible IQ team at IDP. So they are our data experts, and they span across multiple continents, and they make our research possible. So they dedicated their time and energy so that we could run this survey and contribute these great insights to the sector. So a huge shout out to the IDP IQ team. And at this time, to provide some further background and context on the survey, I will now hand it over to Jessica Sandberg.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ellie. It's great to be here. I don't know if the chat feature is enabled, Ellie, in a way, but I would love to know who our guests are. So if it's possible for them to jump into the chat with intros and where they're from, I'd be really interested to see where everybody's coming from. So please do that if that's possible for you. As Ellie said, my name is Jessica. Oh, here we go. People are popping up. Great to see. Yeah, as I said, my name is Jessica. And if you want to advance the slide, I think, Carolyn, thank you so much. I wanted to kind of first draw your attention to the organization names that are on this slide. And I don't know if we have any folks from these organizations with us today, but I wanted to make sure, as Ellie said, that I really emphasize my thanks personally for the work that each and every organization put into this survey. This really is the product of so many brains and minds across the field and across the industry that have not only helped to get the word out, but have also contributed to the content, making sure that the data that we collected and the questions that we asked were going to be relevant to members all across the field of international higher education in the United States. So that's very important to say. And I want to also give IDP some kudos as an outsider, because I think that it takes courage to jump into this space, right? This is a topic we have talked about and wondered about and hoped for a very long time. And I think for IDP to come in and put their resources into this is kind of an objective arbitrator, so to speak. I think it took a lot of time and resources away from other business projects, and I'm really grateful for that. As Ellie may have touched on, this project really came out of a think tank event that IDP hosted in early 2023 that was hosted by IDP in conjunction with the AIEA conference in Washington, D.C. That was a sort of roundtable conversation with thought leaders in international education to talk about the prospect of a national strategy. And what came out of that meeting was a recognition that we needed a much wider net. We needed a bigger tent, whatever metaphor you want to use, that we really needed to do a pulse check on all corners of international higher education. That would include community colleges and English language programs and policy groups and membership organizations and everyone that's involved in the very diverse landscape that we work in. So again, this is the product of all of that work. I think this was probably 9 months or so of work that went into this. We just shared the results of this about a month or so ago in the most recent AIEA conference, another think tank event that IDP hosted. And now we're really excited to kind of take this data on the road. So there will be more of these, and really excited to get your feedback, your responses, as we identify some areas of consensus around this issue and start to sort of paint the path forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elle to talk about the methodology and the functionality and how the survey was kind of put together before we get to the results.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. And just before I dive into the respondent data, we're going to try a little live poll here to see how many folks in this webinar have participated in the survey. So that should pop up on your screens shortly. Asking if you participated in this survey. See a nice mix coming through. And as I mentioned, I know we have some Canadians attending as well. So some folks there may not have participated in the survey, but are interested in the results. Okay, so it looks like we're seeing about a split here for folks who have participated and have not. A little bit more who haven't. So hopefully we'll get you for the next survey. Are you able to see the results as well, Jessica, on your end? No. Okay, let me see if I can share these somehow. Or I can verbally tell you all that 58% of folks here have not taken the survey, 41% have taken the survey, and 2% say that they started the survey but weren't able to complete it. So we totally get it, fully understand, and hopefully we'll be able to, there we go. I can share the results now, and you should be able to see them. Perfect. Okay. So now we will dive into the survey results. So this survey was hosted by Qualtrics, and it was a 15-minute online survey. While it was executed and managed by IDP, it truly was a sector-wide effort to develop the content, promote it, and distribute it, as Jessica spoke about. So we're grateful for all the member organizations and nonprofits that joined this collaboration. And the survey was out in the field between November 28th and December 22nd, 2023. We had 405 total respondents to the survey. And taking a look at our respondent profile on this slide, it is perhaps no surprise that the largest cohort of respondents was from higher education institutions. So 77% of respondents were from institutions. This was followed by private sector firms at 9%, an other category at 6%, English language centers or schools at 5%, membership or policy advising orgs at 2%, and finally, U.S. secondary schools there at 1%. And while this survey was distributed widely and questions pertain to both inbound and outbound student mobility, there is an emphasis on inbound in the survey questions and those who took it. So you will see that come through in the results. Looking at the respondents by state, we can see that the top 5 states by respondent volume are starred here. So Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, California, and Texas. But then we do see a nice spread across the rest of the country. So some pretty good responses from throughout the states. We also asked respondents to indicate their level of seniority within their institution or organization. So the graph on the left side of the screen here, we can see that 7% of respondents were in executive leadership roles, 26% in senior management, 46% there in the middle in management, 17% indicated that they are practitioners, and 4% chose not to disclose. And for those individuals who indicated that they work at institutions, we asked them if they are the senior international officer at their institution. So 23% of respondents said yes, they are the SIO, 54% said no, and another 23% chose not to specify. Taking a deeper look at the institutions that responded, we asked these respondents to select their institution name from a list, and then this list of institution names was tied to the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, more commonly known to all of us as IPEDS. So with the institution name linked to IPEDS, we are able to look at the most recently reported international student populations at these institutions. So over on the left of this slide, we have what IPEDS calls the non-resident alien percentage of total enrollment or international student population. So we can see that a quarter of responding institutions here have 0 to 3% international student enrollment in the bar on the far left. And then in the fourth bar here, we see that 14% of institutions reported they have 12% or more international student population. And then another quarter did not provide this information to IPEDS. But overall, there is good distribution across these different percentage levels. And then over on the right of this slide, we have international student population by total volume. And again, around a quarter of institutions did not provide this data, but 22% of institutions reported 1,700 or more international students on campus. Another 22% reported between 500 and 1,700 international students on their campuses. And this is in contrast to the 14% of institutions who reported 0 to 149 total international student volume on campus. So what we saw come through in the survey results is some variance between how these institutions with different international student populations answer the survey questions. And we see some of that come through in the free text responses, and we'll highlight a few of those as we go through the survey. So all of this provides some context for the survey results that we are about to share with you. And at this time, I will pass it back to Jessica, who will cover our section on the value of a national strategy at the country level.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elle. I know we were both very pleased to see the amount of variety there, particularly around the levels of engagement of the institutions that responded, because as you said, that's going to lend itself to different motivations and challenges as we get into the content here. So in our first set of questions, we asked survey takers about the value, the importance of having a national strategy. And we wanted to do this through two lenses. So we asked them first, how would you view a national strategy for the country as a whole? So not thinking about your day job, but just thinking as an international education professional independently, how do you view the value of this for the United States? And then we later asked a separate set of questions, asking them to put that institutional or organizational hat back on and think about the value of it for their employer. So we'll go through those sets of questions and you'll see a couple of key differences. So in this first question, we started out asking about questions of thinking of the country as a whole. So in this question, thinking of the country as a whole, why do you think such a strategy might be important to the United States? And this was a ranked question, so respondents placed the answers into the order of importance. And what you can see here is that the number one choice for everyone was global competitiveness, followed by cultural enrichment. And then we get into innovation and research contributions, followed by economic impact, which is tuition revenue is a reality for many, followed by diplomacy, and finally, labor market needs. We're going to tease out these topics more in subsequent questions. So we'll go to the next one. All right, so we wanted to dive in and ask about anticipated challenges and concerns. But we started out with the yes/no question. Thinking of the country as a whole, do you have any concerns or foresee any limitations to forming a national strategy? And we got kind of an even response. More than half, just a little bit more than half said, no problems at all. So I don't know why we're not doing it already, Ellie, but anyway, 47% did see some concerns. So we followed up with them with some subsequent questions. So we asked for those, what number that was, 47%, we asked them, what concerns do you have about such a strategy? And we gave multiple choice here. You can see the largest answer here was achieving consensus in a diverse U.S. higher education landscape. We already got a hint about that in the demographics data, and now we're seeing this come through in survey results. The second chosen answer was the sustainability of this kind of a plan. Third choice was concerns about a one-size-fits-all strategy, again, speaking to the differences in the variety of institutions that might be participating. Fourth was that a strategy might take too long to be effective. And then a pretty sizable chunk of folks chose other as their answer. And we'll look at what people, the other category, they had an opportunity to give their reasons in the comments. And so we pulled a few of those forward. In the comments section for this question, I observed two general themes. One is what I would call political barriers. And that was, you can see some of the quotes on your screen, but people talked about concerns about the US political climate not being receptive to a national strategy, or just that public opinion wasn't going to be supportive. We've all heard concerns about international students potentially taking up seats that should go to domestic students, or post-graduation opportunities in a similar vein. The other area was what I would call implementation gaps, that the fear that a strategy would just be lip service, that we would put something together that really wouldn't be supported with resources or have a real implementation structure built into it. And one of the comments here that's sort of the top right that I thought was good to call out was someone mentioned, a few people mentioned actually, that having a federal level plan wasn't going to be a complete plan unless it really involved state level coordination, because so many of these decisions around enrollment are made at the state level. So then we asked, thinking of the country as a whole, what are the most important objectives for a national strategy? So earlier we looked at value, and now we're asking about outcomes. We provided survey takers with actually quite a long list and asked them to pick their top three. So on this slide, what we're highlighting are the top three that were most often selected. On the left, you see development of a skilled, globally aware, intellectually competent US workforce. So that's a mouthful, but it's a very lofty goal. The second was improved perception of the US as a welcoming, accessible study destination. Goes back to the You Are Welcome Here campaign, Elle, still needed. And then third was securing the United States as the leading study destination for international students. So wanting to hold on to that #1 spot that the US has enjoyed for quite some time. All right, this slide is a little challenging a little intimidating when you first look at it, but I think I can walk us through it pretty well. So the colors on your screen represent different destination countries that international students can choose. And the column headers at the top are the different segments of survey takers that represent different areas of the field of higher education, including higher education institutions, private sector, English language centers, membership and policy organizations, and other. The question we asked was, where does the United States rank compared to other destination countries, leading destination countries, in terms of having a successful, coordinated effort to support international education? Keep in mind this survey was out in the field in December, so this did go out before some of those big announcements were made in terms of some of the restrictions that have been announced in Canada that many of you are aware of or are living through. So the results here, if you look across the top at the blue color, that is Canada. And you can see that most of our sector segments chose Canada as being the most successful at this, right? And the #1 spot. This kind of peachy salmon color is what I'm going to call it, which was in the #1, 2, and 3 spots is the UK. This tan color is Australia. Followed then #4 in the navy blue is Germany. And then finally down here in this gray blue, we get to the United States. And so below that, we have France, I think, and China. So I think the takeaway here is that in the United States, the people who are taking the survey perceive themselves to be less coordinated, less organized, less collaborative than other leading destination. So it tells me that the self-assessment is that there's a lot of work to do compared to our peers. All right. So then we drill down a little further here and ask, what are the top challenges in uniting all stakeholders in effectively executing a national strategy? And here again, we allowed respondents to select their top 3. And you can see that there is a pretty broad distribution here. The top challenge that was mentioned is limited political support from the federal government. We saw that earlier. And I think, let me back up a second and say that these answers that are on your screen, I think, break roughly into 3 categories. One is lack of political support, federal level being mentioned most often, but then also all the way on your right at 30%, lack of political support from the state government. Lack of coordination and communication within the field of higher education is another theme. You see that with the 62% mentioning difficulty achieving consensus and 51% citing inadequate coordination among stakeholders. And then lastly, but perhaps most importantly, is insufficient funding and resources to really execute a national strategy. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and now we asked similar set of questions, but we asked survey takers to think about it from their institution or organization's perspective in terms of how they would benefit or not benefit from a national strategy on international education. Okay, so here we asked, again, the same question: why do you think that the strategy might be important for your institution or organization? We did allow, there were 12 choices here, and we allowed respondents to choose their top 5. And we can see here a fairly even distribution, sort of a clustering effect, I think, across the top 7. You can read these on your screen. I won't go through all of them, but challenges that were mentioned are, benefits that were mentioned were a possibility of alleviating access barriers for and challenges for international students, the ability to access international partnership opportunities, the support of achieving DEI goals at institutions, accessing resources, improving post-study opportunities, some mentions of tuition revenue and the possibilities that that might bring about. And then lastly, the importance of increasing study abroad, the access to it for underserved students. Okay, so we asked this question again about the possibility for concerns or limitations in executing a national strategy. So thinking now from the organization or institutional perspective, and I think it's interesting to see the difference here, because if you recall, when we asked this on a national level, it was a fairly even split between yes or no among those that thought there would be limitations and concerns. Here now at the institutional and organizational level, fewer concerns, right? So I think that there is some consensus here around seeing a benefit to this. But of those that did have concerns, we again asked that follow-up question, so we can drill into those now. So what are the concerns that group of 30-some% have? Concerns that were listed, I think, are interesting ones, and again reflect some themes that we're already seeing here. The largest answer that was given was that this might constrain my institution or organization in some way, right? And some of that comes through in our comments that we'll see in just a moment. Others are concerned that they don't have the resources to support, their institution doesn't have the resources to support internationalization. A couple of these answers are related to the fact that it's just not in alignment with the institution's mission. So maybe the institution is really focused on local and domestic students. Maybe they lack capacity for international students, for enrolling more students. Or maybe internationalization is not a focus for that particular institution. Again, we see local and state restrictions that were maybe a limiting factor. And then I think a couple of interesting answers towards the bottom that are worth noting are, some were honest enough to say they don't welcome the competition, that a national strategy might bring more players onto the field and they don't really want that competition. And then there's a small group that I think is important as well that say they don't need a national strategy. And those may be the institutions that we saw in that earlier screen that are heavily engaged in international education already, and they're doing quite fine. They don't need the help, right? So there's a big variety, I think, in the concerns that some folks have about strategy. So there was a large chunk of answers that were in the other category, I think about 22%. And again, we looked at the comments that came through and grouped them into a few categories. One is local hesitation. So this is kind of on the ground level where perhaps there are roadblocks or there's disinterest in the local community, or even inside the institution, roadblocks from upper administration, campus culture, again, that public opinion maybe just isn't there. Again, some concerns about constraints, that mandatory compliance would limit flexibility at institutions that they didn't appreciate. And then a lot of concerns about equity. This came through probably most strongly. Concerns that a national strategy wouldn't benefit everyone in the field equally. So a lot of concerns about the fact that more prestigious and well-known institutions would benefit more than the lesser known institutions that need the help, or that other individual actors like English language instruction would be left out of the mix. And so, yeah, just a lot of concerns around equity in a national strategy and making sure that every corner is addressed. All right, I think for the next section, I'm going to turn it back over to Elle to talk about nuts and bolts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. Really, really interesting stuff. And as I was listening to you and watching you, I did realize that we are both in black turtlenecks. So I just want to let folks know this was not planned. We do not have an official webinar uniform, purely coincidence. But yes, our next section explores attitudes towards setting targets regarding international student enrollment and study abroad participation rates as part of the national strategy. And as you are likely aware, several other countries have set numerical targets, typically around the volume of incoming international students, as part of their strategies and as a way to measure their success. So we first asked respondents, what in your opinion is the most appropriate and achievable international student enrollment target for the US to set over the next decade? And respondents could only choose one answer to this question. And the results here show that there's not really an overwhelming consensus on this question. We do see that over 40% believe we should increase enrollment. That is the second and third bubble here combined. However, in our first bubble here, we see that 29% of respondents would prefer to determine targets by institution type. And this speaks to the point that we've seen come out in other questions throughout this survey, that institutions really vary greatly in their current level of international engagement in this space. They have different capacities, different barriers, and so on. So this approach would favor setting targets or benchmarks in more of a tiered fashion to address different institutional needs. Then over on the right of this slide in those smaller bubbles, we have 16% of respondents interested in determining targets by region and 12% who are not in favor of setting any enrollment targets. We then asked respondents, what is the ideal market position for the United States over the next 10 years in terms of the global share of international students? As we all know, the US is the #1 host of international students, though the margin has narrowed and our annual growth rate is not as high as that of other destinations, according to UNESCO data. But as a response to this question, we can see that 37% of respondents feel the US should significantly increase market share, 35% feel we should maintain market leadership, and 28% feel we should disregard market position altogether. And this question also included a free text option for respondents to enter comments. And what we saw in the comments is that many folks in that 28% would favor other types of targets. So targets around diversity, economic targets, links to labor market needs, and so on. We then asked respondents, what is the most appropriate goal for the United States to set regarding study abroad participation rates of American undergraduates over the next decade? And for some context, the Open Doors report just released in late 2023 shows that during the 21-22 academic year, US study abroad rates rebounded to more than half of pre-pandemic levels, with over 188,000 students pursuing opportunities abroad for academic credit. So what we saw in the survey results here is that unlike the question on setting targets for inbound enrollment, there's much more consensus around increasing study abroad participation rates. So 56% here on the left said we should significantly increase participation rate and exceed pre-pandemic levels. 25% said modestly increase participation rates and resume our pre-pandemic levels, and 18% said disregard the participation rate altogether. And there was 1% who said maintain current participation rates. So clearly the vast majority of respondents feel we should increase these rates either modestly or significantly. Next, because diversity is such a critical goal, we asked, how should the US aim to increase the diversity of international student enrollment in the next decade? This was a multiple choice question where respondents could select a maximum of 3 responses. So 68% of respondents said we should address visa denial rates. Another 57% said we should provide dedicated scholarships and funding to diversity markets. And 56% said we should expand outreach and recruitment efforts. And we saw smaller percentages saying more transfer partnerships and increasing access for displaced students. Then similarly, we also asked, how should the US aim to increase the diversity of education abroad over the next decade? And this, again, was a multiple choice question where the respondents could choose a maximum of 3 responses. So once again, we're seeing greater consensus around education abroad. So we see that 88% of respondents indicate more dedicated scholarships and funding for US students to study abroad. So perhaps no surprise, people want to be able to offer more money. But there are also several non-monetary ways that emerged, including 54% saying we should broadcast the benefits, opportunities, and career advantages of studying abroad, 53% saying more partnerships and collaborations in a wider range of host countries and regions, 51% say expanding the range and diversity of programs and formats, and then some smaller percentages say expanding services, hiring more diverse professionals in education abroad, and so on. So with all of these great ideas on practical ways that we can really take action and advance this strategy, we'll now take a look at our survey section on choosing tactics. So we asked respondents, what are some of the items that you think should be included in a national strategy for the United States? This was a multiple choice question where respondents could select a maximum of 5 responses. And there were many to choose from, but these that appear on screen now were the top 5 that were most chosen. So we can see the tactics that received the most attention reflect the concerns and priorities that respondents raised in previous survey questions. So 81% said the modernization of international student work and post-graduation policies is the most important thing that should be included as a tactic. 75% said the modernization of F1 and J1 visa policies and procedures. We also see expanded federal support and funding for attracting international students, expanding dual intent to F1 students, and expanding federal funding opportunities for US students to study abroad. So we are seeing consensus around some of these key tactics that were identified as important for the national strategy effort. And at this time, I will pass it back to Jessica again for our final section on role assignment and organization.
Yeah, thanks, Elle. I think it's great. It's really exciting to see a lot of these areas of consensus, like you say, and also the places where we're diverging, right? So it gives us a lot of information to figure out where we go next. And the last section, in some ways, I think is the hardest part because we can talk about what we want for, endless eras and decades, but in reality, how are we going to get it done? How are we going to organize ourselves? How are we going to bridge some of these communication gaps and come together as a field to really advance a strategy? So we'll move, to the next question. So we asked a big question, which is, what kind of organizational structure should oversee the development and implementation of a national strategy? We know that we have in the United States a very decentralized environment compared to other destination countries. And again, this is a sticking point. How do we come together? I think we are blessed and also cursed in the United States to have such a wide array of different organization bodies, membership organizations, and so forth. But we don't necessarily have one encompassing umbrella that holds us all. So in this question, we asked respondents, we only allowed respondents to choose one. And you'll see right off the bat that these 2 on the left were virtually tied. And there's not enough room on the slide to put the full answer, but let me read them because I think the details here are important. The first one at 33% is an independent cross-sector body. And the definition of this was a cross-sector body of college and university leaders, international education professionals, NGOs, and business leaders. The second one was the White House Coordinating Council, and that is a coordinating council that would be chaired by a White House official and composed of representatives from key federal agencies, including the State Department, Department of Education, as well as other agencies working in close cooperation with international education professionals. You can see that, again, these two are virtually tied. And one of the things that I saw repeatedly in the comments was that we need some combination of those two, right? Knowing that we're going to always have changing administrations in the White House, some may be more supportive to our goals than others. I think as a field, we do need to think about what is an appropriate, sustainable model of support at the federal level from the White House. You know, would we want to have a public advocate of some kind who would represent international education for us? What do we need at the national level to sort of get this done and sustain us going forward? The next question is, how are we going to pay for this, right? It's always the key question with any vision that one advances. And I think this one makes me laugh a little bit because you'll remember from the earlier slides that the majority of respondents are from higher education institutions. So is it any surprise that they would like someone else to pay for this, right? We would all like someone else to pay for this. So you can see overwhelming majority of answers pointed to the government as who should be paying the bill, but there are a couple of other payment methods that I think are worth calling out to you. The second most popular answer was membership dues from participating institutions and organizations, so a little bit more voluntary. The third was a tax or a fee that's assigned to all U.S. colleges and universities that would be used to collect fees. And then there's a few people who feel that funding isn't necessary. It'll get done somehow. I think it's worth noting in the comments, we also saw a number of people emphasize that students shouldn't be paying for this. You know, a number of people said that students are already bearing the cost of SEVIS fees, application fees, and all of the other, you know, processing burdens and costs, and that we shouldn't be adding this to their plate. So I wanted to give that a mention as well. And then lastly, we asked a really pointed question about the role that the U.S. government should play in supporting a national strategy. And this was a check all that apply answer. And again, you can see that a sizable chunk of people checked all, right? They checked all that applied. They would like the government, U.S. government, to do all of the things. But top of that wish list for everyone, it seems, is to reform and improve student visa policies to really help out with that access piece. And a close second is reforming and improving international student work policies. That's both during their program of study and post-graduation. Coming in third is financial support and incentives for international students. That might come in the form of scholarships. You'll see in fifth position is also financial support related, but for institutions, incentives and financial support for institutions. 56% thought that the government should be leading that organizational body that we just talked about to implement a strategy. And then lastly, we didn't talk much about this in the survey, but I think is important is having the government lead on the organization of a branding and marketing campaign for the United States, which I think is also valuable to talk about. So that is the end of our results, Ellie. I will turn it back over to you to, no, I'm going to keep it over to me, aren't I? Sorry. I'm going to bring us into the summary statement. And then I'll turn it over to you. Okay. Wrapping up. So that's the end of our content, but what came out of our think tank event and conversations with folks that have already seen the results here is you know, a few areas of consensus that we have observed and would love to get your feedback on as well. One is that largely people feel that a national strategy would be beneficial. Most institutions and organizations feel that there is a benefit to having a national strategy for international education. The second is clearly work pathways and visa policies should be modernized. We can see consensus around that. Third is that diversity and access are a priority within these goals. This is going to necessitate reducing visa denial rates, probably funding and scholarships, expanding outreach efforts, et cetera. But there seems to be pretty large consensus around that. In fourth position, there's a desire to grow or at least maintain the United States as the leading destination for international students. Next is a need to grow American student participation in education abroad, and again, particularly increasing access to traditionally underserved students. And then lastly, there's a need for some kind of central organization of strategy implementation, and that's going to require some degree of federal, state, and sector support. So still lots of work to do, but I do think we have some key areas to get us started.
Completely agree. Lots of work to do, and it's on all of us to do it, but it's great to have these areas of consensus for us as a starting point. So I think at this time we can open it up for questions. We are also going to drop in the chat box 2 links to further reports that you can download. One is to the sector survey white paper report, and this is an in-depth report on these survey findings that we have discussed today, a little further insight. The other link that we will drop is a summary report from our recent think tank event. So this was just released yesterday, and this report details everything that was discussed at the think tank event and the conclusions that we came to. And I will now take a look at the questions that we've received. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point that Cheryl makes, Ellie, that you're probably just seeing about some of the data gaps that exist that are, beyond the scope of this particular project, but some of the challenges that projects like this and that NAFSA has led have in order to capture accurate data on English language program participation. And Cheryl makes a good point that some of that data is being overlooked when it comes to really measuring the impact of international students and the economic impact as well. And I think that's that's definitely something we can work as a field to correct.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. We were very pleased to have Cheryl join us for the think tank event, and we want to make sure that English language programs are represented in all of these survey efforts and strategy efforts.
I think while people are typing out questions, if they have them, Cheryl, I know Cheryl says it was more of a comment than a question, but I think it was worth raising to everybody, Cheryl, so thanks for it. I think if as people are thinking of questions, it would be interesting to see in the chat what surprised people, if anything, about the survey results. I think hearing reactions is really valuable, especially because as we saw in the poll, we have a lot of people here today that didn't participate in the survey. So it would be great to kind of hear some reactions and see if people find their voice in this in the results.
See, we also have a question about how folks can get involved in these efforts. And we do have some info on some next steps if we can reshare our slide deck here. One of the ways that you can get involved is by joining the newly formed US for Success Coalition. And we will share information on that in our follow-up email and include a link for you to join. But whether you're an institution, a sector organization, you can join this effort lobbying to advance international education in the US. Another way that you can support these efforts is by attending our NAFSA session. So we will be covering these survey results and having a panel discussion on what they mean for the sector at the annual NAFSA conference in New Orleans. So this session will take place on Wednesday, May 29th from 4:30 to 5:20 p.m. So just before you head off to your receptions. And I will be facilitating this conversation with Clay Harmon, Executive Director at AIRC, Melanie Gottlieb, Executive Director at AACRAO, and Jill Allen Murray, Deputy Executive Director of Public Policy at NAFSA. So if you are attending the conference, we'd love to have you join this session and participate in the conversation. And then finally, I'd just like to remind everyone that we offer custom data and research services here at IDP. So if you are interested in more in-depth insights or you need data to inform your recruitment and marketing, we'd love to help you out. Please feel free to get in touch with us at any point and we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, fantastic. I know, Ellie, there's oops, there is a question from or comment from Sue Roberts in the Q&A, interested in what next steps might be to act on these results beyond individual responses. And I think that's, that is the million-dollar question, right? I think initiatives like the US for Success Coalition, the think tanks that IDP has been hosting, bringing folks together that are involved in international education but haven't come together before. I think that each of these conversations sort of propels us forward. And maybe I should add too that a lot of the conversations that we've had and the results have been shared with key representatives from the government agencies that are involved in education. So they're informing the conversation and participating and bringing this back, and they're doing more collaboration with one another. So it feels to me like the momentum is building. I don't know that we have exactly the vehicle on the highway yet, but it feels like we've maybe started to, I don't know. I don't really have like an auto mechanic metaphor to see this through, but yeah, I think that we're starting to get the car built up, but it's not quite road ready, something like that.
I think that's
my hope.
exactly it, Jessica. It's like we're starting, we're getting there, and these are the kind of conversations we need to have more of. So interested in everyone's thoughts, really. And I see we have a great comment here from Jonna Watson. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, talking about how important it is to get a better understanding of how international students are funded across the country and by institution type. And they mentioned the role of extramural grants and contract awards in the funding of international graduate STEM students. So definitely important point. I know there's been a lot of talk about getting a better understanding of how students are funded and how we can help students from diverse backgrounds to fund themselves as well. So definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, and let me go to Cheryl's next question and then get to there's a third one I think we'll have time for. Cheryl asked kind of a follow-up question about government agency buy-in on international education strategy, and she goes on to say that her perception is from the think tank event and other forums that she's been in, that there's a little bit of a reluctance or an attitude of like, we already have a strategy, and well, we know, probably know which agency is saying that last piece. But yeah, I think I can just give my own personal impression, having met with some of these folks, probably similar conversations that you've had, Cheryl. But I think my sense of it is that there's a little bit of a game of chicken, I think, where they feel like if you build it, we'll come. And we're like, no, you build it and we'll come. I think there's a little bit of that back and forth where I think a lot of us in higher ed think the government should build the structure and then we'll participate and they should fund it. And I think they feel like, no, you don't want to put it inside the government. That'll slow it down with bureaucracy and make it vulnerable to funding cuts and changing administrations. You guys need to get yourself organized and we'll continue to participate. And I think it's almost on us to organize them and pull them together, getting them to collaborate and giving them the space to participate and pull funding out of them. They're always going to have their individual initiatives and their own territorial battles that I think we're have to navigate diplomatically, but that's just my personal read on things. I feel like when I speak privately to those individuals, they're enthusiastic, they want to help, they want to see it happen, but there's this sentiment of like, help us help you, like you need to take the first step before we can follow. But I would welcome other people to give their insights, because there are others probably here who have more daily interactions with government officials than I do.
Yeah, good point, Jessica. Thank you. See, our next question is, has the coalition considered mitigation strategies for this momentum? Should there be a change in the White House come next year? Excellent question. And though I can't speak on behalf of the coalition, IDP is now a coalition member, but I won't speak on behalf of them. I trust that they are considering this and considering it as a very real possibility. I will say, from an IDP perspective, we just ran a survey that was just out in the field and closed last week, asking international students if a change in administration would affect their desire to come to the US. And those results will be released end of this month. So stay tuned for some upcoming student research on what the upcoming presidential election will mean for international student perceptions of the US.
And I think Cynthia has a great question that I know is something we have talked about, Elle, for IDP, which is that, it would be really, it's such a perfect comment. It's like, it would be really interesting in future presentations to learn best practices from other countries that have implemented strategies, right? And we have had some of those conversations, and we've talked about having breakout groups and workshops on that very topic. So I think it's interesting to know, it's good to know that there's an appetite for that. And I think there's real possibility of building some topics around that.
Completely agree. And yeah, I think we have a really unique kind of bird's eye view at IDP, where we work with all of these destination markets and have some good intel and insights from them. So that's definitely something we can look into and put together. So really fantastic comments and questions.
And the last one that I'm seeing here, I don't feel qualified to answer because it's a question for the coalition. And I was trying to look at the participant names. I'm not sure if we have anyone that is on the steering committee of the coalition who could answer that, but I know that the coalition has a number of goals and objectives that they have outlined that they want to achieve. And that is, I dropped the web link in here earlier. I would encourage you to take a look at that. And if you haven't joined as an institution or organization, please do, so you can kind of be plugged into their news and the progress that they're making. I have no doubt that the possible change in the White House is very much on their minds on a daily basis, but I'm not 100% sure I know what strategies they have in place.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica.
I think that's everything.
I think that's it.
Great questions. Yeah.
So thank you all so much for your fantastic questions, your participation, and for joining us here today. As I've mentioned, this webinar was recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be shared with you in a follow-up email tomorrow, along with those links for you to download further reports. Thank you to Jessica for being a fantastic co-host, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon, hopefully at the NAFSA conference.
And thanks to all of you for joining and for participating in the survey and great questions. See you at the next one, right?
Take care all.
Bye.